So tonight I'm here with one of my friends. He goes by the name Mr. Geocon. He's from the Twitter, Discord, right-wing community, and I've been interacting with him for quite some time now. And him and I actually did a stream together last year when he used to go by the screen name Ghost of Buckley. And we discussed mainstream conservatism and reactionary thought. And really, he came more and more down on the position on the side of the conservative establishment and what would be considered, I guess, today, conservatism Inc. And today, we're going to actually have a discussion about kind of how our views have evolved since last year and the differences between the views that we hold now versus back then, and how things have evolved, and really the direction that conservatism Inc. or mainstream conservatism, as you might call it, has gone in the past year or so. I guess I'll hand it over to Mr. Geocon. How have your views changed within the last year?
Oh, yes. Well, I've decided to be more open about my Georgist views and eschew the image of William F. Buckley Jr. While I still do hold a lot of respect for the man as an intellectual figure, he was operating in a different time, I believe. And a lot of his ideas are just not fit to deal with the current problems that we're facing today. For instance, the activist foreign policy angle of the Buckleyite conservative may have made sense back when we were at war with the Soviet Union, but nowadays we're not at war with the Soviet Union. And we have this endless war on terror, and that's just been used as an excuse to spread liberal democracy all over the world, which one would think that if you were right wing, you wouldn't want to spread feminism and gay rights all over the planet. You'd want to not have those things in other countries, which is kind of baffling why so many mainstream conservatives seem to support that kind of foreign policy establishment.
Yeah, and would you say that, I guess what we could cover first is the ideology of, I guess we could call that Buckleyite conservatism or mainstream conservatism. And my view on it is that it's something that, kind of like you said, it was designed for a very different society than the one we live in today. Sorry, the meme, we live in a society, ah, ha, ha. Okay, but anyway, the problem with it is that it's not really fit for the present day, and it has really no way of answering the problems that the right wingers are facing now. And what we're ending up with is an ideology designed for a different time that's really just incapable of dealing with the problems. And the left always wins that, just based on the situation we find ourselves in, especially with, everyone knows, like demographics and stuff like that. It's just not going to work. I mean, Vincent James, I watched a video he made, I think today, where he goes over how mainstream conservatism is just failing due to the demographic situation, and how the establishment that's upholding it isn't really sincere in their efforts to reverse that tide. So I guess we'll go with the ideology first. In what way would you say it's not really appropriate for the present day?
Well, there are two ways in which I am kind of disgusted with conservative Inc. and how it stands today. In the first place, first of all, we have to establish what the Buckleyite conservatism is. And Frank Meyer was the person who coined the term fusionism, which is the idea that we were going to it was the idea that socially conservative, religious right Christians and free market libertarians should have an alliance because their views don't actually contradict each other. The idea is that you can't have freedom without virtue, and you can't have virtue without freedom. So we should promote both at the same time. That was the plan. And, Buckley also added to this a very strong anti-communist foreign policy, which attracted a lot of the neoconservative types. And the neoconservatives were disaffected leftists who did not, they were pretty much old style leftists who did not like the excesses of the new left, and they did not like strong in their sort of communist sympathizing ways. They were so they moved from being left wing to right wing, and they called themselves neoconservatives because they were a new type of conservatism that was being added. And so Buckleyite conservatism, in short, is a coalition between groups with mutually exclusive goals who were united by their opposition to both the domestic new left of the 1960s and the communist Soviet Union and China.
Yeah, so I think that one of the problems we have today is that the name conservative, the name conservatism has kind of lost its original meaning. A lot of people in the dissident right will say that that they don't consider themselves conservatives, that I'm not a conservative. And I fully understand that when you look at kind of the what we're discussing right now, Conservatism Inc., and kind of the last 70 years of its track record. But I actually am of the opinion that I am a conservative. I do identify as a conservative in the Edward Burkean sense. That, to me, what that means is that you would like to conserve a wider civilization, a culture, heritage, morality, and that's really like the foundation of the civilization you live in, and that's what your goal needs to be, to protect, to carry on into the future, and to ensure the future prosperity of such. But the problem we have today, though, is that the title conservative has just been applied to neoliberal economic policy. And I'm of the opinion that neoliberalism is not conservative, and that really to genuinely wish to conserve the various things from Western civilization that we actually would like to, that people on the dissident right are fighting in favor of, you would have to move away from that. And the problem we have now, though, is that the establishment that calls themselves conservative really only seem to stand for neoliberal economic policy. What would you say to that? Oh, hello? Oh, yeah. Go ahead.
I'm sorry. I'm sorry.
That's fine.
There was something there's something that I need to do. I'm sorry. Can you hold off for 15 minutes? I'll have to come back to this. I'm so sorry about this.
Yeah, no problem.
You could.
I'll answer questions from the chat. It's all fine.
Yeah. I apologize. I should have gotten this under control earlier.
Okay, no problem. Okay, so sorry about that, but he's a bit busy at the moment. But if you have any questions in the chat about anything related to this, or just anything in general, because we'll continue this conversation in a minute or two as soon as he gets back, just post them down below and I'd be happy to answer them just as we're waiting. So speaking of Edmund Burke, I recently finished reading his essay, The Response to the French Revolution, the reflections on the French Revolution and various, what was the full title? The Reflections on the French Revolution. It has a longer title, but yeah, it's kind of hard to remember it. But I really enjoyed that essay. I think that there is a lot of stuff in there about like the economics of the time that's not really useful. But what I think is very, very true about it is, maybe I could do a video about this eventually, but the way that Edmund Burke says that the French Revolution really disrespected the very nature of French society, like the French society at its core, it kind of identified the entire thing as evil. And I think one of my favorite things he had said in the essay was that it had acted as if the French were these wretched people prior to 1789, and that liberation just created something completely anew, and that all that came before that was illegitimate. And, I think that's very relevant to what we're seeing today, that we can't seem to, well, at least the narrative that's being pushed is that anything prior to World War II is illegitimate. That essentially the West was, and I talk about this in my videos, that the West was racist, sexist, homophobic, whatever, prior to World War II. And that was kind of when we overcame our original sin of racism. And then we've kind of become liberated ever since. And it's really kind of like this iconoclasm against the civilizational core and the foundation. And it does ring true for today for modern progressivism. And I mean, the problem is you can't run a long-term civilization based on that. You can't just reject the very foundations of your society and then start anew just right away. And well, the problem is, though, that they are trying to create something completely new. The goal is to eventually rid Western civilization of its very foundations and bring in something to replace it. But anyway, I'll answer some questions from the chat. So I remember Edmund Burke saying, liberty does not exist in the absence of morality. A lot of situations, especially climate change, seem to manifest the very problem he's warned about. I agree with that quote, certainly, that one of the problems that we got from the Enlightenment, and maybe I'll even do an entire Enlightenment video on this. It's that in my series, Lies of the Enlightenment, it's that we have this idea that liberty means freedom from authority, really, that having no standards whatsoever, being able to do whatever you want as long as it doesn't harm someone else, that's being free. When in reality, that's just being, degenerate, really. It's a society that lacks order. And this is where you kind of get the idea that, whatever kind of degenerate actions are perfectly justifiable as long as they're not harming someone else. Well, the problem with that is that you have to actually have a form of morality in order to run a long-term civilization. You can't have like your entire next generation aborted and expect to survive into the future. You can't have all these atomized individuals who have no sense of who they are, of what kind of made their society to begin with, what nation they're part of, or what they have a responsibility to pass on to the future. When they have no sense of that, there's no way you can run a long-term civilization like that. There's no way that you can actually carry your society, a stable society, forward. And Orwell and Good, my buddy from the Twitter and YouTube channel of the same name, he talks about that in his book. I don't know exactly what you would mean in regards to climate change. I mean, liberty and morality don't exist. Well, I don't know what you really intended to say with that. I'm sorry, but I guess if anyone wants my opinion on the climate change kind of scare that's going on right now, I'd say that I do believe I mean, I'm not a climate change denier. And I do believe that there are environmental threats going forward. The problem is that what's being pushed by the establishment is purely meant to push the globalist agenda. That's just blatantly obvious. And just how manufactured the whole thing is. Like this Greta Thunberg girl, she's being put in the UN, in all these different parliament buildings, and just put everywhere, just covered wall to wall in the mainstream media. And you have her saying, "How dare you," to the most powerful people in the world, and then they're just applauding away. Clearly, this person is just a mouthpiece rather than an actual rebel against any system. And what just strikes me so much about it is just how manufactured the whole thing is. It's just how fake it really all is. And what's very worrying is what this is going to be used for, because when you think of a war, like for example, if you were say in World War I, and then you see you're across no man's land, you see the other army doing something, but you don't quite know what they're doing. You kind of see they're up to something suspicious. Let's say they put up like an object, you see an object appear, but you don't know what it is. the thing is, like, if they're your enemy in a war and they're hostile toward you, the reason that they're doing what you do not know, it's something that will be harmful to you. It is something that it is an attack on you. You just don't exactly know what it is. So when the globalist establishment is pushing this narrative, you know that it has negative implications for, well, anyone who is opposed to the project, because it's the same people who are pushing things like mass immigration, critical theory, and all the negative things that we discuss on YouTube. If it's the same people pushing that, you can bet that they have very they have very sinister intentions with that. So I just wonder what they're going to use this to justify in the future. Like, we already hear things like the words climate refugee coming out, and we all know exactly what that means. It means open the borders, of course. Yeah. Okay. What is the ideal Brexit outcome for you? I think I'll defer that to someone in the UK. I'm not really the most qualified person to answer that, but I guess I'd say the best the best outcome would be just leave them, for them to just leave and have a no deal, I guess. But I think there's other people that are probably more qualified than me to discuss that. Okay. Have you heard of the English satirist Chris Morris? No, I haven't. Opinions on Roman Catholicism, Vatican II. I'm not a Catholic. I'm actually a Baptist, but the Catholic Church, I find that the church has been subverted in many ways. The way that, like, I mean, and I have a lot of respect for the Catholic faith. I don't by any means dislike them. I do think that a lot of the practitioners of it probably are genuinely conservative people. They genuinely are actually working towards a more healthy society. But then when you see, like, for example, that statue that they unleashed in the Vatican just a couple weeks ago, created by some quote unquote Canadian artist. Yeah, Canadian, a statue of all these like refugees, and the very first refugee at the very front. Well, you can guess what religion he was from. Pro tip: it wasn't Christianity, and it wasn't Islam either. But anyway, what I said on Twitter was that it's essentially a monument to an alien religion being placed in the Vatican, and that alien religion is egalitarianism. Egalitarianism is the religion used to justify globalism. And that's being placed square at the middle of the Vatican. And anyone who with half a brain knows the symbolism of what's being put there. What it's saying is that Europe must open its borders to the third world. And that's being placed right at the Vatican. And you can definitely tell who's really in control there. And that they're essentially become an arm of neoliberalism. They've essentially become another outlet for globalism. And with the church, for them, there's just no excuse for that, because I mean, you can make the argument for a lot of like people that they just sold out, they gave into the money power. But with the churches, it's like both the Protestant and the Catholic ones, it results in the death of the religion. People leave churches when they become liberal. Their congregation dies because they're just preaching the exact same thing that that's being preached by the media, the education system, the government, the wider progressive narrative. What reason would there ever be for someone to go to church? I mean, you can get the same crap from the mainstream media. There is no reason for it. And the churches end up dying because of that. So what you essentially have is, and not only that, but the globalism is an atheist. It is an atheistic religion, egalitarianism, the religion to justify globalism. It is atheistic. But the problem is, though, that these churches are giving into something that is designed to crush all spirituality worldwide. The goal, like another mistake a lot of people might make sometimes, is that they have this idea that Islam is really what's that Islam is going to take over, that the West is going to become Islamized. But that's not really the point of the global homo, as we might call it. The actual point is to break everyone down into these consumers, really. Is to create these a consumer class with no spirituality, identity, morality, culture that extends beyond consumption. And the problem is that these churches are really just giving into that. So they are giving into a force that is designed to destroy spirituality throughout the human race, really. All spirituality, all non-materialistic value on earth is to be commodified. And, you know, it is just really pathetic that they just give in when to avoid short-term, not even short-term profit, because they're not profiting off of it. It's short-term social points. It's to not be called sexist or homophobic or racist by the very people that aren't even Christians that want you destroyed. It's really quite amazing. And it's just a shame, really. It's really sad, I must say. And that is why the religion is dying. That's why people I mean, if that's really what you're being offered, why on earth would anyone be a Christian? Now, I will say that you can't actually don't conflate like Christian actual theology with globalism, because pre-1945, Christianity was the foundation of the West's culture. And that's been destroyed over the last 75 years and replaced with this egalitarian secular religion. So, and I mean, for the 1500 years that it was the foundation of the West's culture, we never had things like, you never had things like feminism. You never had things like mass immigration from the third world. They never had the arguments that these globalist subverted churches are making now were never made at those times. So it'd be incorrect to say that the reason we have this stuff today is because of Christianity. That would be incorrect. But basically what's the problem we have is that they've given into the pressure. They've given into the zeitgeist of the present day. Just like Conservatism Inc. has, like we're talking about. Yeah, if there's any other questions anyone would like to put in the chat. I'm sorry. Hopefully he comes back, because we were actually having a good conversation, but hopefully this is interesting. I guess this will also kind of be a Q&A stream too. Because I don't want to like give away all the stuff we were going to discuss. I don't want to say it all now and then have to repeat it again later. So yeah, just tag me in the chat if there's any questions you'd like me to answer. What else has been on my mind recently? On the Latin right, what are your views on Judaism? Okay, well, on the Latin right, I don't know enough about Latin America to really answer any legitimate questions on it. It's not my area of expertise, and I don't really feel comfortable. What are my thoughts on Judaism? Well, can I really discuss those on YouTube? What are your views on Judaism? Okay, I mean, look, I know all about this. I know all about the certain question. I'm totally woke to it. But let's not go down that path right now. I guess, okay, here's my opinion. Okay, everyone's putting it down. Here's the thing. Look, I'm fully aware of it. I'm fully aware of the media and everything like that. I know all about the education system. I know all about cultural Marxism, who pushes it. And I know about these NGOs and stuff like that. But here's the thing. It's like, you got to be really careful what you discuss on the internet these days. It's not like the YouTube of 2015. It's really difficult. And secondly, I don't like to go on that too much, because I just find like it can kind of get repetitive. I mean, like I fully understand the problem, but one of the things is that if you, when you just focus on that too much, it kind of just creates this unhealthy mindset that you blame everything on that, and then you're unable to kind of change yourself, and then you kind of just become inward looking, and you don't really look towards you don't really look towards really what needs to be done in order to kind of pull us out of this rut that we're kind of this decline that the West is in. Really, when you just assign too much blame to an outside group, but then not really kind of look inward at really the societal sickness that really exists and how you can fix it, that kind of does create an unhealthy mindset. But yes, I know. Okay, trust me, guys. I know all about I know all about that. Like, I'm not naive. Okay. Are you voting in the upcoming election? If you are voting, what party do you support, or strategically instead? I'm voting for the People's Party of Canada. I think that with kind of like what we're talking about with here, Mainstream Conservative Inc. in Canada, it's basically worthless. They've given in to the entire platform of the Liberal Party. They're just kind of a bit more economically conservative. They're just kind of a bit more for lower taxes. And there's really nothing that I see from them that really moves us in the meta-political direction we need to go in. The People's Party of Canada has moved significantly to the right, and I support them for that reason. And the thing is, I'd rather see them actually do well. And I know that they're not going to win, obviously. I'd rather see like that kind of energy, like from a populist nationalist party. And I know they're not like really, where we need to be, but they're headed in the right direction. It gets kind of these talking points into the dialogue. And Maxime Bernier has done a decent job of that. And he has gone pretty significantly to the right. I know it's just for the election. I don't know how genuine he actually is in that, but saying that he wants to repeal the Multiculturalism Act and that he wants to actually remove that from the Constitution is actually a pretty ballsy thing to say. I wasn't expecting that, and at least for that, I'd like to see him get some support. I'm more focused on the meta politics section. Like, I'd rather have the Liberals win, but actually have kind of the populist nationalist right in Canada kind of actually make some kind of a splash, then have the Conservatives win, but then not do anything, just be essentially the Liberals, but without the cringy gaffes that Justin Trudeau makes every 5 minutes. It's a lot better in terms of the long-term interests to really go in that direction.
Hello there.
Hello. Okay, so we will.
I'm so sorry about that.
No problem, man. Anyway, what were we discussing before you left?
I said specifically that fusionism, the Buckleyite conservatism, as we know it in the West, should best be understood as an anti-communist Cold War coalition between socially conservative religious people, Christians, the foreign policy hawks that were against the communists, and free market libertarians. And it's very obvious that when you're facing an atheistic, materialistic regime that embraces economic collectivism, you'd want a coalition that embraces economic individualism and Christianity as being the opposite of your enemy. You get what I'm saying?
I guess the point that I made, though, was that I don't really view neoliberalism as inherently conservative. In fact, I'd say in the era of both woke capitalism and the consumer culture, the nihilistic one that we have today, I kind of see neoliberalism as very anti-conservative because it's really working against what I'd like to conserve. It's working against the longer longevity of the various Western nations that we live in. So I just, and the problem is that mainstream conservatism as it exists today is essentially just neoliberalism.
Yeah, I mean, and it's not even, here's another thing too. There are people out there who, there are many people out there in the reactionary sphere who like to talk about how the mainstream conservatism is run by libertarians, and they'll say things like that, but then the, but it's not really libertarianism that these mainstream conservatives actually say. I mean, don't get me wrong, a lot of their justifications for what they do come down to free market. We need to help the free market and things like that. But if you actually look at their policies and you look at what libertarians, what especially the radical libertarians, what they embrace, you'll find that there is a large discrepancy, and it's a sort of an inconsistent libertarianism, where it's kind of libertarian. They only advocate for libertarian policies when it benefits either the left wing or big business, and other times but they're more than happy to use the state to support anti-discrimination laws, which consistent libertarians are against.
Well, yeah, I think that the problem is that I don't want to use the phrase kosher sandwich, but the phrase is that the idea is that what you really kind of have with the mainstream paradigm is that you have kind of two ends of the same coin. You kind of have the neoliberal economic policy coming from the right, so the global trade, the tax cuts for the corporations, the deregulation on big business coming from the right, and then from the left you have the intersectionality, you have the mass immigration, you have the degeneracy, kind of the breakdown of the morality, the undermining of the culture, critical theory, and stuff like that. And they kind of form. I was going to do a video on this eventually, but they kind of form in some ways, like the base and superstructure of globalism. They kind of form both the cultural aspect and the economic aspect of the same project. Would you say you agree with that?
Oh yes, that is one thing that you find. For the longest time, I could not really wrap my head around why it was that these corporations all suddenly flipped to the left. Because if you look at who was the biggest supporters of big business, it was the old right. It was the post World War II. Immediately after World War II, there was it was the old right. It was they were um, they were the people who united around fighting against the FDR legislation, the regulatory state promulgated by both Rockefeller Republicans and FDR era progressives and social liberals, that thought that we needed a more interventionist economic policy. And the conservatives were long time defenders of big business, but suddenly big business is now very much in support of left wingers. And for the longest time, when I was more in the libertarian camp, I could not understand this. I mean, it did not seem to me there was a huge there was a huge short-term profit incentive. I mean, sure, a lot of these companies do get their money from China, but if it was just trying to appeal to Chinese audiences and foreign audiences that motivated companies to become left wing, then we wouldn't see a lot of all these companies support gay pride. We wouldn't see all these companies acquiesce to left-wing politics. What you would see is something like what's happening with the NBA right now, with firing people who go against the Chinese government. Not not necessarily supporting the left wing.
Like Nike or something, like embracing Colin Kaepernick and removing the Betsy Ross flag from the shoe, right?
Yeah. I mean, that didn't. So it couldn't be just like short-term profits at stake. That's behind this, or else, why is Colin Kaepernick a thing? Why wouldn't they just censor things that? Why are they so concerned with wokeness if all they cared about was the bottom line?
Yeah, and this is actually an argument that I've brought up with Academic Agent before, that I think that one of the major problems with the whole Milton Friedman school of economics is that it focuses only on the bottom line. It assumes that in economics, essentially what you have is basically parties that are just looking to maximize profit at any means necessary. But I don't really think that's the case. I tend to think that the driving force behind economics, economic decision making, is actually Maslow's hierarchy of needs. And I did a video on that if anyone wants to know a bit more about Maslow's hierarchy. But once somebody is already economically wealthy enough, money doesn't really matter to them anymore. And what you end up with is that they'll start investing in things that'll increase status, that'll increase their esteem. It'll increase their power. And they're really, to me, at least my opinion, is that the real driving force behind woke capitalism and woke capital is actually not necessarily money. What it actually is that there is a wider societal project that's that they're undergoing, and that's really what the capital is going behind. They're looking in the long term, and that's really why they support the woke politics so much. That I actually think it's the kind of the corporations that are facilitating it. And it kind of goes back to what I was saying earlier, that you kind of see neoliberal economic policy lining up very, very well with woke politics. Like an example being like something like feminism. Like what's the act? It's sold to you through the cultural realm. It's sold as being this kind of like liberation for women. It makes them free. But the reality of it, and the economic reality, is that it essentially turns them into units of production and consumption instead of mothers. Or LGBT. I think that it was actually Morgoth that brought it up on a stream, that it essentially turns people into a lifelong consumer. So it's essentially someone who
Academic Agent actually once, a long time ago, he made a video called "The Left is Right on These Things," and one of the things he supported in that video was gay rights, and he specifically made an economic argument for gay rights, saying that if we allowed gay people to be gay, then they would be lifelong consumers, and that'd be great for the economy.
Yeah. Was that one of his earlier videos?
Oh yes, it was one of his earlier videos before.
Yeah, because he's gone significant
before he became a right winger, actually.
Yeah, because I've spoken to him quite often a bit, and he actually now is quite strongly socially conservative. So I think maybe he kind of made the same. Maybe he's kind of actually made the same journey. But yeah, like for example, the example is that an LGBT person is never going to have kids. They're going to always live this sexually charged lifestyle. They're going to be a mass consumer, and their entire identity is kind of filtered into sexuality. It's filtered into something that is very easy to market to, and you can fully understand why a corporation would support that. And I think that the implications of that is that for someone on the right, and if you're taking like the previous definition I gave of conservatism, that you're trying to really conserve Western European civilization into the future, neoliberalism and economic libertarianism does not really make sense, because you're essentially giving all the power that these corporations want, who are woke. You're giving all this power to people who have interests very contrary to yours. And you also kind of lose out on the narrative, because you kind of take the whole like cruel corporation, greedy people on the nose, because the left can say, well, you're the ones, they can blame economic inequality on the right. They can say that like corporations and kind of
they're
big
going
business
to blame inequality on the right, no matter what.
Yes, but like the economic ones, because obviously I'm certainly not an egalitarian. I don't believe in egalitarianism. at all. But they can blame things like the cruelty, I guess, of
Corporations.
Yeah, of corporations. They can blame that on the right when in reality it's pushing society in a more leftward direction. I just got to read out one super chat. I'll let you answer in 1 second.
Okay.
Libertarians often forget the difference between big business and free market. Big business like cartels and cozy deals with big government. Yeah, that's also true. Like a lot of
this is a very common mistake in conservative thinking. They excuse everything that big business does as just that's just the free market, as if big businesses can't undermine the free market.
Yeah, exactly. So Google like having essentially a monopoly on the internet for God's sake. They what they really have though is that they can crush any competition based on how huge they are, and that's not free market at all. But then the libertarian will kind of write it off as being as just being the free market when it's really anything such. But you can respond to my previous point, or you can respond to that one.
Oh yeah, I mean, there's actually, I mean, part of the funny thing about the ironic thing is that the neoconservative types, when they first entered the coalition, they actually made very similar criticisms that we're making towards libertarian types. They actually stated that, well, we can't allow free markets and capitalism to undermine the moral society that we live in, the morals of the society that we live in, because if we do that, then we can, if we allow the morals of the society we live in to be undermined, then it will undermine capitalism too, because capitalism is based on certain moral framework within the Western civilization. This is what Irving Kristol actually. This is how he critiqued people like F.A. Hayek.
I think like it's just vile to put it that way, that capitalism matters more than the your entire civilizational soul.
It's kind of
it's true though. It's true.
It's kind of like, let me put it to you.
I'm not accusing you of saying that.
It's just that the kind of the libertarian position is just self-contradictory, because you need strong morals in order to uphold what you would consider to be a free market. There is just no way around that. I mean, if everybody and their mother is born into a family of single moms, let me put it to you this way. How respectful of private property do you think young men who grow up in single parent households are? Exactly.
Not very.
Well, considering how often they steal and they're arrested for theft and property damage, I'd say very few. And this is actually what F.A. Hayek, who in later life became more of a socially conservative. This is what he realized, that you needed to defend the family if you wanted to defend free enterprise. And and the socialists actually recognized this earlier. Frederick Engels was a supporter of women's liberation, and because he saw the family as an obstacle to international socialism. And the two are on the same side of the same coin. And one last thing I would say about quote unquote capitalism, I don't really like that term because it's so vague. But if you mean by capitalism things like competition between groups and respect for private property, those things are a staple in Western civilization, and those things are unique to Western civilization. You don't see them a lot outside of Western civilization unless they were specifically imported from Western companies by Asians, and the and so what I find is that the modern day libertarians don't really want to admit that their ideas are rooted in a certain moral framework. They want to pretend that their ideas are neutral to all moral views and universal to everybody, when that isn't really the case. Would you agree with that?
So you would say that the problem with libertarianism is that they don't understand that kind of the, not really libertarian views, but a lot of the things like respect for property rights is inherently Western, and they don't understand that.
It's rooted in Western culture, Western assumptions about moral, cultural values, Western traditions about the family. A lot of the just the functioning of capitalism is based on a lot of these assumptions that are unique to the West. And if you undermine those values, even if you do so in a free market, quote unquote, I mean, let's be real here. There's never been a truly free market ever. If you do so if a business decides that they're going to promote gay pride, then that's undermining the family. And if you undermine the family, then you're basically undermining free enterprise and respect for property through the way and through the means that I laid out earlier. Single motherhood is a huge problem in the modern world, and it's probably one. If you were a libertarian, you should consider you should consider the biggest threat to free markets to be single motherhood and sexual libertinism more than the actions of any state.
I think that kind of in the spirit of it. So yes, like the kind of the functionality of the economy of the West, definitely throughout its history. Yes, that definitely is, I think, part of the problem. But I would probably disagree that necessarily undermining that is against the current economic system as it exists today. Like corporations, as I pointed out, they're very much in favor of that stuff being undermined.
Well, they're chasing after is like an ideological project, like you said. Mm-hmm. And the end goal of that project is going to be something. I watched a great video on this by the guy who wrote a book called Google Marxism. The end goal of this project is going to be something like China. We say, is China socialism? Is it capitalism? Well, yes and no. It's kind of its own thing. But whatever it is, it's very hostile to Western values, very hostile to individual freedom, and very pro-business.
Yeah, I think that it's kind of the kind of divide between, you kind of do have to get away from the whole divide between it's like capitalism, socialism, because it's kind of an outdated model. I will also say that I think that there is another component of property rights that is missing, though, especially from the mainstream right, which they haven't been able to really conceptualize yet, is what you have is that when you have populations, say from the third world, who haven't been able to really create prosperous societies as they have in the West, you're not going to get respect for property rights from that, because it's a more robust survival strategy to essentially just parasite off of a successful system and actually kind of work into it, which is why you'll see basically all when it comes to like immigration from the third world, or I mean, I'll be blunt here. When it comes to different genotypes, you'll see that the support for the far left is very strong, because it's much more effective because they really can't succeed in the free market. So it's much more effective to just extract wealth from a successful white European population than it is to actually compete in the market as it was really designed.
Oh yes, it's kind of a it is kind of like that, and that is yeah, and I honestly think that this there is the two sides of things why corporations support this woke culture, because they like the end game of the woke people. They like the end game of the left because they think it'll help them profit in the end, and also they also like agree with the moral vision of it too. So it's profit and fulfilling their self-esteem. If you looked at in the past what people did when they were wealthy, you know, people, in order to gain self-esteem, wealthy people supported their local communities. They built they built libraries dedicated to their name, and instead of that,
Or they became patrons of the arts or something like that.
yeah, patrons of the arts, exactly. They did things like that to help their self-esteem, but now they are supporting wokeness. That is the new way of fulfilling that need. Would you agree with that?
I think that it has a lot to do with that. I think that wokeness kind of gives people a dopamine hit. It kind of gives them a sense of being fulfilled. But I do think that is kind of more of a middle class phenomenon. I could be wrong about that, but I do kind of think that like the middle class kind of are the ones that actually buy into like the religiosity of wokeness, of social justice politics, because that's who it's really aimed at and designed to kind of brainwash. But I do think that the elites kind of it's more about the power. I also think though that one of the problems we have is that our entire like conception of reality as it exists today is purely materialistic. So we can't actually get behind the idea of any like more spiritual understanding of what we want to do with society. So a aristocrat, say in the 17th century, would have become a patron of the arts. They would have they would have funded all these artists to create these magnificent cathedrals or painting, sculpture, stuff like that. And they really wanted to kind of enrich. I know that's kind of a word that's been really ironically used, but actually genuinely enrich the society they lived in and kind of create a more life affirming world. But then the problem we have today is that we can't really conceptualize of anything beyond the material. So it kind of just becomes all about money and power. So like really the goal is to just become more and more wealthy. There is another argument I'm not going to get into this one here, but there is another argument that a lot of the reasons that a lot of elites are pushing this is because they actually have a very a different national interest in mind. But that's kind of not, you're not allowed to discuss that on YouTube. But
Yes, okay, yes. You mean Jewish identitarianism? Well, I don't think most of the people I don't think most of our elites have those kinds of sympathies. I personally don't think that is. I think that would describe a few of the intellectual types, and but I don't think that it describes everyone. But I do think, but going back to, but speaking of Jewish identitarianism, I do think that that is a problem within the mainstream right. Is the obsession with Zionism, and that has taken over their foreign policy imagination.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Okay. We'll try not to like fly too close to the sun here, but I do remember one of my things that I really kind of one of the things that I really kind of became disenfranchised with it back in my university days. And I know we discussed this on Discord.
Disillusioned, you mean?
Yes, disillusioned with kind of the conservative ink. Was that when I was in university, they actually had a conservative club, and the entire club would like. They were very vocal about Zionism, but then when it came to actual like Canadian identity and a Canadian nationalism, they were completely vacant on that. And also the fact that very few people were actually what you'd be considered old stock Canadians, and but they were very, very vocal on the whole Zionism issue. Yeah, and then this is one of the major problems, is that they can understand the concept of self-determination. They can understand the concept of the nation state. They can understand the concept of wanting to preserve a culture going into the future, but not with their own damn country. Like you can see
Oh
this
yeah,
with like TP USA.
yeah, it's a Christian heresy. It's an old Christian heresy that dates back to England, and essentially the Protestants of England came up with this idea from their own idiosyncratic reading of the Bible, and they, even though they had never met a Jew in their life, they decided that Jews needed to have their own home state, and this would bring about so many different prophecies. And I'm not going to get into why that's wrong. I'm just going to note that that point of view has basically dominated the it has basically dominated English Protestant thought for a very long time. And the reason why it seems so ascendant now is because we didn't because when back then, all those centuries ago, we weren't just like, we weren't treating it as if it was our main priority.
Mhm.
You know what I mean?
I'd argue it has a lot to do with lobbying, to be honest.
Yeah, it is. It does have a lot to do with lobbying, but it's just that the idea is. It's just like the idea is centuries old. Why is it just
Like I don't think
so
Trump believes
noticeably
that.
bad?
I think his policies in the Middle East, and really that of the neocon establishment, has a lot more to do with something like APAC than it does to have any real like Christian theological founding. If I had to be quite honest.
Oh, well, yeah, it's well, you have. I tend to view that as. I actually tend to view our foreign policy as being more ideologically driven than monetarily driven.
I guess that might be a point of disagreement, but I would kind of like to, not, because this topic is a dicey one.
Oh,
Well,
sure, sure. I'm sorry.
yeah, no, no, I brought it up.
I
I brought
just
it
think it's just that I don't think, if we're talking about the problems with conservative Inc., this is like this is probably one of the main issues, is that they tend to prioritize things that are very that the average person does not prioritize. And I'll give you an example of this. My mother loves watching Fox News. That she watches Fox News all the time. She watches the Five religiously, and so she talks about it. We're in the car one day, and she's talking about how, oh, it's such a bad idea that Donald Trump uh, pulled out of Syria. Pulled out of Syria. Well, he didn't pull out of Syria. He pulled out of North Syria. He pulled out of Syria and left the Kurds hanging high and dry. And I said, and I just asked, and she's just wondering, why did I not agree? Why did I agree to Donald Trump pulling out of Syria? And I said, let me ask you something. Have you ever heard of the Kurds? And she's like, no. Do you know who they are? No. Well, that's why. You know, nobody knows who the Kurds are. Okay, half the people who are against Donald Trump pulling out of Syria don't know who the Kurds are. Nobody knows what the Kurds are. The Kurds are a bunch of Antifa style communists. A lot of them are, and it's just kind of we only teamed up with them in the Middle East because they were our common enemies against ISIS, and it's like these kinds of very minute details are given the forefront in our political imaginations, and meanwhile, you have people like Charlie Kirk. In that Vincent James video that you mentioned earlier, I think it was released today. He actually showed a video in which Charlie Kirk dismissed all talk about immigration as being wonkish. Wonkish. Do you even know what that word means? Wonkish. That it means that it's like minute details. That's basically what he's just dismissing immigration as if it was something beneath his interests. Something
And not only that, but
get into the.
I mean, he just completely dismissed, because the guy brought up that 80% of immigrants vote left, 80% vote Democrat. And then he basically just says, well, we shouldn't make policies based on that. And it's like, okay, so you're basically saying that you're okay with losing your entire political
It's
movement.
a suicide pact.
Yeah, if you can even call it that. And he says, like, oh, well, I want 1 million Elon Musks to come into. Well, first, there don't exist 1 million Elon Musks. And and that's just not at all the reality of
even if
today.
even if I agreed that I wanted 1 million Elon Musks, who by the way would probably vote Democrat too, even if I wanted 1 million Elon Musks to come into America, that is not what our immigration system is designed for. I mean, most people who want immigration reform, most of the anti-immigration right, want a merit-based system, and it's it's just the open borders types just aren't. They just brush the issue aside. It's like it doesn't even matter to them, and then instead they're talking about we need to bomb Iran for Israel, as if that was the main problem, whatever Israel's doing. I don't care about Israel. I do not care about Israel. Israel is just fine in the Middle East. It's a bastion of democracy and whatever. It can do just fine without us constantly worrying about it. You know what I mean?
Yeah, and I think that the problem is that they really are kind of an arm of the zeitgeist, and because the zeitgeist wants mass immigration, the establishment, the cathedral, if you'd like to call it that, wants that policy, and the Charlie Kirks of the world really are just a kind of a pressure valve to take the students who really should be going toward the dissident right. If you're a young white male, or a young white girl for that matter too, looking at the long term, you should be like looking at the long term. You do not have a very good future under the current establishment. You should be looking for alternatives. You should be becoming a reactionary or a nationalist or whatever you want to call it, dissident right winger. But kind of the Charlie Kirks of the world, what they are is kind of designed to appeal to that crowd and kind of just keep them locked into the destructive paradigm that really exists right now.
I'd like to. It's kind of interesting that you brought this up. I'd like to share what I showed you before we started.
Oh yes, no problem.
Yeah. So there was there's a pretty interesting Catholic blogger by the name of Edward Fazer, and while he mostly talks about stuff like metaphysics, he does write a bit about politics. And so he wrote this article. And he quotes an earlier article he wrote called "The Evolution of Liberalism and Quote Unquote Conservatism," and he makes a commentary on the 5 stages of the 5 stages of acceptance between the liberals and the conservatives, and it's just a repeating pattern. And showing people this and showing the history of this should wake people up. Does wake people up to the lie that is, the the revolving door between liberals, the pendulum swing. Yes, that is the name of it. So he starts by saying, to the charge that liberals are, or given their principles should be, in favor of X, where X equals legalizing abortion, liberalizing obscenity laws, banning smoking on private property, legalizing same-sex marriage, outlawing the public advocacy of traditional sexual morality, etc., etc. The standard liberal response goes through about 5 stages, with, it seems, roughly 5-10 years passing between each stage, though sometimes the transition is much quicker than that. Here they are. Stage 1, Oh, please, only a far right-wing nutjob would make such a paranoid and ridiculous accusation. And what stage 2? Well, I wouldn't go as far as X. All the same, it's good to be open-minded about those things. I mean, people used to think ending slavery was a crazy idea. Stage 3. Hey, the Europeans have had X for years and the sky hasn't fallen. But no, I admit this backwards country probably isn't ready for it yet. Stage 4. Of course I'm in favor of X. It's in the Constitution. Only a far right-wing nutjob could oppose it. Stage 5. You have the right to remain silent. Anything you can say can be used against you in the court of law. You know, and stage 5 is illegalizing opposition to X, essentially. And then you go down, and he talks about, well, we can rely on the conservatives, right? Well, of course not. For conservatives, or maybe I should say, quote unquote, conservatives, since there's very little that they actually manage to conserve, unless money is somehow involved, seem to go through 5 stages of their own. Stage 1, mark my words, if the extreme left had its way, they'd foist X upon us. These nutjobs must be opposed. Stage 2, oh my gosh, now even thoughtful mainstream liberals favor X. Fortunately, it's still political suicide. Stage 3, X now exists in 45 out of 50 states. Fellow conservatives, we need to learn how to adjust to this grim new reality. Stage 4, X isn't so bad, really, when you can think about it. And you know, sometimes change is good. Consider slavery. Stage 5. Hey, I was always in favor of X. You have me confused with a paleocon or a theocon or Bible thumper, far right, whatever. But everyone knows that mainstream conservatism has nothing to do with those nut jobs. So you see where I'm going with this. It's a common pattern that manifests itself. And this is a guy who, by all intents and purposes, I don't even think he is like, he's even heard of the idea of the cathedral and in the Moldbuggian sense. But he's just able to pick this out from looking at the rhetoric on both sides of the gay marriage debate.
Well, yeah, it's because it's just so manifest. Like we have Charlie Kirk, going back to him, basically celebrating, what was it, like them legalizing homosexuality in Botswana on Twitter. I mean, oh yeah, well, we've won, guys. Trump is he's won it for us. That's just what everyone voted for Trump for. That was it. Homosexuality.
Yeah, it had nothing to do with that immigration stuff. That stuff is kind of wonky.
Yeah.
You have to laugh in order not to cry.
Yeah.
But I just think that I think that's where some conservatives are. You know, I haven't changed that much in my actual political beliefs since we last talked. I've just lost my faith in the mainstream right, because I thought at the time that the mainstream right was being taken over by the populists, but it seems as though the populists have been subverted by the mainstream right, even though the mainstream right is as unpopular as ever.
Would you say that you kind of hold the same first principles? So like you're kind of your heart is still in the same place. You're kind of still fighting for the same thing, but you kind of just now see a different way of trying to pursue that.
Well, I would say, I mean, what would yeah, that was kind of my problem with your original video. It was like, maybe there are some conservatives who believe in egalitarianism, but I don't think most conservatives would hold a very strong support of egalitarianism, especially economic egalitarianism. I mean, Ben Shapiro never defends economic egalitarianism, for instance. He thinks that inequality, most conservatives, when they talk about inequality, they think it's they think that inequality is just a non-issue, and that it's just a boogeyman that the left uses to justify stealing your money, which it kind of is in a sense, because that is what the left does to support having more control of your life. Oh, these people are unequal. Give me more power.
I think I mean, look, I'm certainly not an egalitarian or even an economic one. I do think that there's a lot more of the legitimate arguments to the income inequality that I actually am more sympathetic towards. For me, like the biggest problem is the social aspect. Like not only just how incorrect it is when it comes to human nature and the political sphere, but also just how it's just so like soul crushing. It just kind of egalitarianism just has this way of destroying all quality, really, because in order for something to be of quality, it has to be better than something.
Oh,
That's
exactly.
my deepest objection to it, really.
Oh yeah, exactly. And there is I can see where you're coming from when you say that mainstream conservatives buy into the egalitarianism, because when they seem to think that all anybody can be anybody can just become a conservative. And there isn't anything about I don't think there's anything inherent to black people that would make them in their like genetics that would make them anti-conservative. Like you aren't born being saying I'm going to be a communist or something like that. But what I do think is that culturally speaking, there is strong cultural elements within African American communities, and there are genetic factors that lead them to promote behaviors that eventually lead to them not liking conservatives and being more open to left wing policies. And no amount of quote unquote integration is going to change that. I don't think we have the ability to integrate immigrants into our society, given how we can't even tell. We don't even know if here's something I always say to people who are for integration. If you can't tell me what it is that's uniquely American about, what it is that is uniquely American, what is uniquely American, then you can't integrate a foreigner. All right. If you don't know who you are, you can't make somebody else be like you.
Yeah, and I'd say another problem is that when you ask a conservative, what are you conservative of? For me, I think of kind of both the wider aspect, the wider Western European Christian civilization, and both my own European old stock Canadian heritage. I do have to kind of acknowledge, though, that is something that resonates with me in a way that it probably is not going to resonate with someone someone that cannot identify with that. And I think one of the problems is that with conservatism is that they don't understand that kind of the American mythos is very, very deeply tied to people of European descent, and that for a lot of African Americans or other groups for that matter, it just simply does not resonate with them because they are unable to identify with that. And I'm not opposed to anyone else having their own culture, as long as you're allowed to have your own kind of you're allowed to have your own communities, your own groups, and that you're not able to essentially leech off of them. But I do have to acknowledge, though, that it simply doesn't appeal to a lot of people, and
Oh
a
yes,
lot of that is
definitely.
due to very deep identitarian issues.
Oh yeah, definitely. I don't think that. I mean, when you try to appeal to, how can you appeal to an African American the values of the founding fathers when most of them were slave owners? How can you square that circle? It's just I don't. I mean, here's another thing about the mainstream conservatives: when they try and pander to black people the same way the left does. I'm not even black, and I
You
don't.
cringe when you see that, yeah.
I'm not even black, and I think that it's. I'm not even a black liberal, and I think it somehow offends me on behalf of black people. I mean, can you? I would not want Candace Owens being my African American outreach.
It's embarrassing. interesting. But the thing is, like, oh yeah, go
It's
ahead.
so fake. It is so fake.
Oh, it is. Yeah.
I mean, and it's so artificial too. It is just so artificial, and that's because it's just not a good fit. It is.
Yeah. And I'd say that my kind of more focus is on things like self-determination than integration, because I acknowledge that there is something that speaks to me about Europe, about not even like countries that I'm necessarily derived from. So even, I mean, I made a video about kind of my own my experiences in the UK, and really kind of how I have this like kind of deep appreciation for it, because that is where my ancestors are derived from. That is kind of the civilization that I am of. But I can still feel that same kind of appreciation for a place like Estonia or Finland, where I've been. Because it is something that, whilst it's not my nation, I still do feel a lot more of a connection to it, though I would never claim I've never claimed to be of that nation, but I do kind of see a lot stronger of similarity. And I don't really feel that same way for say an African civilization. And I mean, they're beautiful in their own sense. I've been to Africa, and I'm perfectly fine with people having their own culture and their own heritage.
But it's a more distant appreciation.
Yeah, it's a more distant appreciation. It's one I could never
You can't
integrate.
say it's yours.
Yeah.
You don't feel like it's yours. This is kind of the thing with me. I don't know. Maybe it's when my heritage is I'm from Eastern European Catholics that immigrated to Texas at the turn of the 20th century. That is my heritage, and that's kind of and that is where and yet when I have fully assimilated into a lot of the Protestant Anglo ideals of the surrounding Texans, and that's kind of that kind of leaves me a sort of adrift, because although I do appreciate a lot of the Burkean style English conservatism, and there is always a bit of a dissonance with me in that, because I feel like intellectually speaking, a lot of the intellectually speaking, I have more in common with like an old school medieval Catholic than one of those kinds of than the Protestant, and then a lot of the Protestants. Even if I understand, even though I've lived in Protestant society my entire life, and I probably wouldn't be at home in Eastern Europe either. It's I think that's kind of the downside to the kind of cosmopolitanism you see in modern society that we just have to deal with, and I think that's why so many people are kind of lost.
Yeah, I totally know what you mean, because I'm about, I think, I'm about fourth or fifth generation Canadian. Most of my great grandparents were born in Canada, but I do kind of feel a big disconnect, because I'm from I'm from Toronto originally, and it's a city that once would have reflected kind of something I would identify with, but really doesn't at all today. And I do kind of wonder I do actually have those wonders too, like what is kind of my place in the world. I do feel like, my nationality definitely is Canadian. I'm probably about as Canadian as can be, but I also have to understand that that's something that's not really existing. That's not really something that's going to exist into the future as it did in 1965, and that there really needs to be kind of a different way forward for that. But I mean, at the same time, I still have a very strong appreciation for, a lot of European countries, the UK, or even a lot of Eastern Europe. I've been there too. I've been to several countries there. I speak some Russian, and I actually appreciate that culture a lot too. One of the problems we have is that a lot of people are kind of lost in the whole cosmopolitanism. And I think, though, that what people on the right really need to push for is the idea of like self-determination, the idea that, we're not going to try to integrate the entire world into this one system, because you just can't really. Certainly, you can't make a conservative one out of that, and it needs to really go toward kind of allowing kind of a more authentic culture to develop as it had in the past. Like that's how you got these deep cultures, because they've existed for so long and they've developed kind of their norms, they've developed their morality, they've developed their heritage over a period of time, and that's kind of how that came about. So yeah, I guess we'll probably end in a couple minutes. Although I think I will also say kind of some of my positions that have changed, just to be fair.
Oh yeah, I'd like to hear what you had to say on that.
Oh yeah, I will definitely. I will just ask you, like, what would you say your position is now? What would you say your, if you can even define one?
Well, here's the thing.
Yeah.
What I would say my position is now is I'm for preserving what was good, and be using that to build something better, into the future. And I don't think, and in that, I think that is what the essence of what conservatism was and still is to this day. And I guess my problem, and while I have a lot of problems with a lot of the reactionary movement as it has existed, I now see aligning myself with reactionary types as being the only way I can preserve what is mine.
Yeah.
And I would say that at this point, the conservative movement is constitutionally incapable of conserving what matters, because they just do not have have the same priorities in mind as I do, frankly. I mean, if you aren't in favor of big business and Israel, then you're not going to. Then the conservative movement isn't going to share your priorities. That's just the bottom line, really. And I think that we should really, but I think the good news out of that is I don't think that most conservatives actually do prioritize Israel and big business. I think most conservatives really do have our priorities, prioritizing conserving what was good about their heritage, and it's and really they're just thinking that we can maybe the Conservative Incorporated, maybe they don't share the same values, but I could possibly use them to gain a temporary victory over the left. But the problem with that is that's just kind of a losing strategy, because of how we've discussed before. Not only does conservatism not have your values in mind, but when it comes to choosing between you and the left, they will side with the left against you.
Mm-hmm. And I'd say that I actually agree with almost all of that. I'd say that I maybe made that exact same journey maybe 2 years ago, maybe a year or two earlier. But yeah, I'd say that's kind of really my position too. And that's kind of why I made my way over to neo-reaction. I'd say that how have my views changed in the last year? I'd say that I'm a lot more, I guess I'd say I'm a lot more open to newer ideas. I mean, and I don't mean this like in like the liberal sense. I mean, like as in, I have to understand that you're not really going to be able to just look at a system that was functional in a pre-modern time and kind of instill that into the present day, and then have a more stable society. Like I think the mistake I made, and I even made a video on this, the video I made called "Ideology Isn't Everything." I made the mistake of looking too much at the Enlightenment. And I know I'm making a series about the Enlightenment right now, and I still stand by those criticisms, but I wanted to do that video before I started that series, because I think one of the mistakes I made was that I kind of looked at the French Revolution as like this point, as this turning point that kind of brought us to where we are, and that it's kind of the end result of that ideology really is the world we have today with all the various problems we have. And I don't really think that's entirely the case. I think a lot of it has to both do with, I think a lot of those ideas, while I still have many problems with them, have been subverted and turned into something they're not. And also that a lot of that also kind of has to do with a lot of the modern world, and that we haven't really found ways to cope with the technology really. So I'd say that's one of my major changes. I'd also say maybe I'm more kind of open to, I guess I'm just more open to the idea of knowing that I don't actually know what's going to come in the future. I don't know what the solution really is going to be, because I know that you're not going to be able to say recreate absolute monarchy. I talk about monarchy a lot on my channel, but I always try to make it clear that I know that it's not like a realistic solution, but it's going to be something. It's going to be something fit for the modern era, but it's something that I don't know really what that's going to be.
I think that's actually where a lot of conservatives that are tired of the mainstream right are right now. They don't know what is going to be their future,
Yeah.
And
yeah. Go ahead.
I'm sorry. I just I just was interjecting, but it's just that when we last had this conversation, I pointed out all the failures of reactionaries throughout history.
Mm-hmm.
And I still stand by that. I just think that if reactionaries are going to succeed in the modern day, we can't copy what they did.
Yes, I think so. I agree with that.
We can't really try and create Franco's Spain. We can't try to recreate Nazi Germany. We can't try to recreate whatever right-wing regime that we admired so much in the past, because
just a disclaimer, neither of us admire Nazi Germany. I just need to say that for the censor system. Anyway, go ahead.
It's insane that you have to say that to the censors. Yeah. It's just
someone's going to take me out of context.
It's like,
sorry for interrupting though, but yeah, go ahead.
Oh yeah. It's just you can't bring back those people. You can't use their tactics. You have to tailor a strategy meant for your time. The principles are eternal, but the politics aren't.
And yeah, I'd say that's what my position is now. I'd say the mistake I was making was I was focusing too much on those past right-wing regimes and not actually incorporating enough of the situation as it exists today, and also kind of being too closed off to the idea that I don't actually know what's coming down the line.
I think that's fair. It's a bit of there is a bit of humility in that I like.
Yeah.
I will say that if I were to say what reactionaries should focus on, being kind of an intellectual type, I'd say that there's surprisingly very little in the way of actual reactionary intellectual critiques of what the most intellectual leftists and liberals have said in the past. Like, for instance, on Google, I could not find a single reactionary critique of John Rawls. Have you ever heard of John Rawls?
No, I haven't.
He's like the social liberal. He is the one who had the most influence on the modern day political philosophy. He's the one who formulated and defended liberal egalitarianism as we know it today. And he's very his views are echoed in every liberal egalitarian's views, and it's kind of astonishing to me that most reactionaries don't even make intellectual arguments against John Rawls's specific points, because if you look at John Rawls's points, and let's be fair, he does write these 600-page books with lots of flowery language that's really say nothing. His arguments aren't that strong, and yet they are the intellectual foundation for a lot of these liberal ideas. And we can basically develop our own reactionary points of view and distinguish them from the mainstream conservatism through our critique of John Rawls.
I haven't heard of him, but that's kind of what I've been trying to do with my Enlightenment videos. But I do kind of really, yeah, go ahead.
I mean, the reactionaries do go back to the very beginning of the Enlightenment, but but most liberals don't really endorse the views of John Locke as John Locke would have said. John Locke is positively reactionary compared to the modern day leftist.
Yeah, that's why I'm not like, that's why in my series I'm not really focusing on like an individual philosopher. I'm more focusing on the way that these ideas exist in the current discourse. So like the idea, like I did one on consent of the governed or on the marketplace of ideas. I'm trying to more focus on how these ideas really affect discourse and how they really affect the liberal democracies that we kind of exist in today. And that's what my focus is. And my other focus right now has been kind of a lot of the human experience of kind of the modern world, and really really kind of why that's kind of driven me toward my kind of current political standing.
Oh, fair enough. And I guess that's a good place to stop. What say you?
I think so too. I've really enjoyed this. And do you have anything left to say, Geocon?
Oh, no. But I think we might have some super chats that we might want to take a look at.
Yeah, I got one from Charlemagne, great YouTube channel. $2 for the tip jar. Thanks big time, Charles. Definitely check out his channel. He makes great videos, and I've actually even taken a few arguments for him in my videos in the past, but I always try to credit people I know I take arguments from. And I think that was all of them for now. Okay, so, well, anyway, I think that's probably where I'll call the stream. Thanks for coming on, man. I really enjoyed this conversation. It was great. Great the first time, great the second time, and maybe we'll definitely do it again. You're welcome on anytime. Maybe a year from now we'll do it. We'll reflect back on this conversation.
Oh yeah, I would love that. You're a very pleasant person to talk to.
You are too. Well, anyway, so have a great night, everyone. Hope you enjoyed that, and I will see you all later.